Materiality and Distinction. Yinka Shonabare's Assertion of Subjective Time and Culture. Yinka Shonabare's 2021 statue, Unintended Sculpture, synthesizes all aspects of its composition, especially its materiality and juxtapositions, to assert Afrocentric temporalities and denaturalize cultural distinctions. Through this, Shonibare blurs the lines of antiquity and separation facilitated by the Western canon, and asserts that, like time, culture flows in a desynchronized manner, one characterized by multiplicity and resistant to hegemonic domination. For context, Unintended Sculpture is a reproduction of Donatello's 15th century David. Shonibare's rendition is patterned in Dutch wax fabrics and sports a replica of an Ife head. Its status in relation to the initial sculpture is incredibly important in that many of its new aspects serve as a response to the Renaissance values of the Donatello. First, looking at texture, the major textural consideration of Shonibare's piece comes in the form of these batik Dutch wax fabrics, a recurring motif in his work. Despite their strong cultural associations with West Africa, they find their roots outside of the region. The designs draw inspiration from Indonesian batiks, a technique involving the production of colored designs on textiles by dyeing them after applying wax to the undyed sections. In the late 19th century, Dutch merchants failed to mass-produce the fabric but found a thriving market in West Africa. By the time most African nations were independent after World War II, these fabrics were already enmeshed in many of their local cultures, bolstered by new meanings and customs created to facilitate their induction. In Untitled Sculpture, the fabrics manifest through split complementary colors, contrasting pinks and blues against their naturalistic design program. Shonibare leverages their ties to multiculturalism and contemporary African culture to create a sort of double meaning for the fabrics. First, they act as a universal sign of West African culture and independence, solidifying the sculpture as a uniquely African production. Secondly, they assert cultural multiplicity through their origins. Their immediate connection to West Africa, despite their complicated roots, illustrates the artificially constructed nature of culture. Via his use of fabric, he concludes the world is far more complex and interconnected than the binaries created by Western hegemony. Shonibare also juxtaposes the fabric against Donatello's solid bronze. The fabric's light colors thrust cultural practices of the past into the modern, paralleling the notion of antiquity and timelessness asserted by the al antica form of Donatello's rendition. The incorporation of such fabrics on statuary hailing from the Italian Renaissance emphasizes their role in the comparable rebirth of African cultures in the post-independence period. When focusing on materials, the major considerations are the patinated bronze of the Ife head replica and the gold of the sword and leaf. Starting with the head, this Ife replica references the ancient Yoruba artistic tradition of lost wax bronze casting. Typically depicting kings and other powerful figures, the heads are thought to bring wealth and prosperity, symbolizing knowledge, good judgment, and power. They originate from Ife, Nigeria, and are dated to the 11th to 15th century, predating the Renaissance artwork on which Unintended Sculpture itself was based. Shonibare's use of bronze in his replication continues the theme of blurring antiquity in his work, bringing the distant past into 2021. This pulling of the antiquated into the new argues for temporal multiplicity. It reasons for a new understanding of time that drags the past forward as an ever-important aspect of West African culture, rather than leaving it in antiquity. Visually, it creates a mix, in which aspects of a more contemporary West African culture mesh with one predating modern concepts of geography. Shonibare's use of the Ife head atop David's body emphasizes its importance in the West African visual vocabulary, likening the head to the iconographical role of a Christian figure like David in the Renaissance. This placement also parallels the Western discovery of the heads in Ife, as they were compared to the discovery of a Nigerian Donatello. Through his placement, Shonibare simultaneously centers West Africa as the focus of the sculpture, while framing the head as a satirical response to the colonial past denial of the value of African art. This formulation of hierarchical scale between the materials and their contextual meanings is continued into the usage of gold for the figure's sword and leaf. The sword refers to Benin's historic weaponization of gold to control the market interests of Western nations and is firmly planted behind the head of Goliath. The leaf, in turn, references the cultural value of gold in Nigeria and other West African nations. Placed directly in the middle of the composition, Shonibare communicates gold's unimportance in relation to the bronze Ife head, a motif representing Nigerian culture and tradition. However, Shonibare situates it far above the head of the slain Goliath, indicating its relative importance. His relegation of gold to the status of weapon and covering asserts a multiplicity of cultural viewpoints and stands in contrast to the European notion of gold as desire. Through its multicultural and temporal nature, Shonibare's statue reads like an ode to West African liberation movements, old and new. It constructs an Afrocentric narrative of Africa, represented by David triumphing over the beheaded Goliath, referencing a slain Western canon. The bright gold sword was an important tool in this triumph, but ultimately the killing blow was felled by the dully colored rock behind David's back. Shonibare leaves this uncolored as a realistic tool of denaturalization he wields when fighting for accurate representations of the diaspora and against hegemonic narratives. If you want to see more of Shonibare's works, check the links I left for you guys in the description. Thanks for watching.